In Guild Wars 2, there is never peace. There is always some world-ending crisis lurking around every corner, which is often led by one specific person or major villain. So in this video, I want to go down the list and explain some of the lore and backstory about every major villain in the Guild Wars 2 storyline. Just as a fair warning, there will be some story spoilers in this video. It's just not possible to talk about some of these characters without mentioning something that could be seen as a big spoiler. So if you haven't played through all of the story and you care about spoilers, take this as your fair warning. Starting things off with the Elder Dragons. Now, I already have a video dedicated to them specifically, so in this video, I'll just be brief. Elder Dragons are ancient godlike beings that are tied to the game's magic system. Approximately every 10,000 years or so, they will awaken and begin consuming all the magic in the world and then go back to sleep. In doing this, they essentially destroy the world. They cause mass extinction and civilization collapse. There are 6 dragons in total: Zaitan, Dragon of Death; Mordremoth, the Jungle Dragon; Kralkatorrik, the Crystal Dragon; Primordus, the Dragon of Fire; Jormag, the Dragon of Ice; and Suwan, the Dragon of Water. And a secret 7th Elder Dragon that has the ability to outlast the others. A lot of the Guild Wars 2 storyline revolves around the Elder Dragons and finding a way to stop them. There is a lot to say about each of them, and like I said, I've already got a video focused on them specifically, so if you want to know more about them in depth, go watch that next. Scarlet Briar. She wasn't born evil. She was originally a second-born Sylvari by the name of Kiara. A curious and talented individual, but what made her different from her siblings is while others searched for personal purpose, she wanted absolute freedom. She would travel across Tyria studying magic, technology, and science wherever she could from whoever would teach her. But everything changed when she entered Omad's machine. The device exposed her to the eternal alchemy and revealed a dark secret about the Sylvari that drove her insane. This insanity altered her identity. She emerged from the machine as Scarlet Briar, and she was now obsessed with causing as much chaos as possible. She became quite skilled at manipulation. The Flame Legion, the Dredge, Pirates, Crate, Inquest, Nightmare Court all joined her. She promised them all something they desired. She would be responsible for the Aetherblade attack on Lion's Arch, the attack on the Queen's Jubilee, the creation of the Tower of Nightmares, and the eventual destruction of Lion's Arch. But all of this chaos wasn't without purpose. It was all part of a bigger plan. Scarlet discovered that a magical ley line deep beneath Lion's Arch could be altered to awaken the jungle dragon Mordremoth. So that was her end goal, Dragon Awakening. Even though she would be defeated, she didn't fail. Enough magic would be diverted to Mordremoth to feed him for awakening. Later on, we would learn that Scarlet was actually the herald of Mordremoth, and the jungle dragon was influencing her actions for quite some time. Scarlet was just a young, bright-eyed Sylvari, curious about the world, but she saw too much that she couldn't handle and went insane. Palawa Joko, the one ruler who refused to die. Some call him the Scourge of Vabi, the Undying King, or the Eternal Monarch of all. Depending on who tells the story, he is either a tyrant or the greatest ruler who ever existed. Joko is from long before the events of Guild Wars 2, however, his exact origins are a bit unclear. All that's known for sure is that he was the son of a traveling Elonian diplomat. He was obsessed with necromancy. He would study it thoroughly to the point where he would eventually become a lich. How exactly he becomes a lich is unknown, but as a lich, he now has the ability to raise an army of undead awakened minions, which he would use to help him conquer Elona. From his bone palace deep in the desolation, Joko would launch a brutal campaign across Elona. Elona would be crushed under his rule for quite some time, but there was always rebellion against him. The hero Tarai Asa led what was left of the Sun Spears at the time behind enemy lines to challenge Joko directly. And against all odds, Tariasa defeated Joko, but it wasn't so simple. Joko is an undead lich, so technically he can't actually die. So instead, Joko was sealed away in a magical prison and guarded by members of the Order of Whispers. Now, somewhere between Guild Wars 1 and 2, Joko would escape his prison. This was partly due to the efforts of cultists and the magical disturbance from the Nightfall event. After being freed, he crushed the remaining resistance against him and conquered all of Alona, except for a few small areas that tried to stay independent. Beneath all of this absurd ego, Joko is actually very intelligent. He understands fear and politics and the power of controlling a narrative. He rewrites history to make himself look like a hero. According to Joko's official history books, he defeated Tariasa. He killed the gods, he gifted magic to the world, and saved Alona from danger countless times. And some people seem to believe him and willingly support him. What I think makes Palawa Joko so memorable is the combination of his power and personality. He can be surprisingly insightful at times. At one point, Joko criticizes the commander for blindly killing elder dragons without fully understanding the consequences. It's debatable if Joko had a better alternative at the time, but it is a fair point. I won't spoil what eventually happens to him, but if you know, well, praise Joko. He was once worshipped as the god of war, but when the commander encounters him in Path of Fire, Balthazar is no longer divine. He is a fallen god willing to burn the entire world just to prove he was right. The humans in Guild Wars 2 worship 6 divine beings, simply called the 6 gods. Among them is Balthazar, the god of war and fire, often considered to be the mightiest of the 6. At the time of the god's arrival on Tyria, Balthazar led the humans on a conquest to conquer all of the world. Humans would pray to him before going into battle. Just seeing his statues or symbols would inspire them. But Balthazar had a dangerous flaw. He didn't just value war, he kind of needed it. War was his purpose. When the Elder Dragons began awakening, Balthazar didn't just see them as a threat to the humans, but as the ultimate challenge to wage war against. The other gods disagreed. They understood that killing an Elder Dragon could destabilize magic and bring on the destruction of the world. But Balthazar didn't care. He threatened the others, so they had to unite against him, stripping him of his power and imprisoning him in the mists. For what I can only assume would have been a very long time, if not for our friend Ridlock Brimstone. After a magical ritual gone wrong, Ridlock would jump into a mist portal to retrieve his flaming sword Sohathan. He found it, flame extinguished, and a stranger nearby offered to reignite it if Ridlock simply freed him. Now, to be fair, at the time, Ridlock didn't know that this was Balthazar. If you were to encounter a stranger in chains in a mysterious realm, I doubt your first guess would be that this man is a god. Maybe Ridlock could have at least asked the guy why he was imprisoned there, but he didn't. And I'm not too confident Balthazar would have been entirely truthful about that. Now being free, Balthazar would return to wage his war against the Elder Dragons. But he wouldn't reveal himself just yet. He needed an army and had to find a way to restore all of his lost power. To do this, he would take advantage of the White Mantle. He used a magical mirror belonging to Lissa to cast an illusion over himself to make him appear as Lazarus the Dire, who is a historical figure the White Mantle used to worship. Many of the White Mantle soldiers abandoned their current leadership to follow this fake Lazarus. Balthazar knew that the White Mantle were experimenting with Bloodstone, so he was able to manipulate the situation, causing the Bloodstone to explode, allowing him to absorb its power. He created an army of lost souls to serve him and dominate anyone who stood against him. Now his war against the dragons wasn't just about the challenge. it was proving his might and proving that the other gods were wrong. What makes Balthazar interesting as a villain is he isn't really evil in the traditional sense. After all, deep down, he did want to stop the Elder Dragons. But the problem was how and why he was doing it. Balthazar believed that any sacrifice was justified if it meant victory. Millions dead and the end of the world as we know it, all of that was acceptable to him if it meant victory, and that's what transforms him from a divine being into a villain. Lazarus the Dire is considered to be the last surviving Mersat. He is a master manipulator and schemer, and so obsessed with survival, he was willing to rip apart his own soul in an attempt to escape death. Lazarus is a Mersat, an ancient race of spellcasters who fought in wars long before humanity rose to power. They are known for their extreme cruelty, and Lazarus is said to be one of the worst. He has a complete disregard for anything but himself. The Mersat learned of a prophecy which foretold of their destruction. The Titans would emerge from the door of Kamali and destroy them, so they would do anything possible to prevent this from coming to pass. Lazarus and the other Mersat would manipulate a human by the name of Saul D'Alessio into worshipping them as gods. They manipulated him into creating a fanatical cult known as the White Mantle, and in return for worship, they would help the humans survive their war against the Char. But this was at great cost. The Mersat needed to sacrifice humans to power the bloodstones, keeping the doors sealed. After Saul discovered the mass sacrifices and had a change of heart about the Mersat, Lazarus and the others kidnapped him. The Mersat would be responsible for enslaving humanity under the rule of the White Mantle. Hundreds, if not thousands, would be sacrificed in their name. The White Mantle would eventually be overthrown by the people of Krita, and the Titans would emerge and begin hunting down and destroying the Mersat. Lazarus, however, devised a plan to survive. He split his soul into magical aspects that would be sealed inside his most faithful followers. He lied to them and told them it was a blessing of power so they would willingly accept it. This allowed him to go dormant and undetected by the Titans. When the threat of the Titans eventually passed, Lazarus could return. However, for an aspect to be extracted, it would kill the host. One person who had an aspect discovered this and tried to destroy it, but they failed, only damaging it. This would put Lazarus in a weakened state, but this betrayal made him vow vengeance against all of humanity for generations to come. Going forward, the aspects would be hidden inside artifacts, so that way no one could tamper with them. For most of the story, Lazarus is dormant, but he still commands a fearsome presence. The White Mantle is mostly still loyal to him and dedicated to helping resurrect him. Lazarus is a villain that I think represents the fear of extinction. He committed atrocities because he thought his own survival justified everything. And in the end, it all failed. I can't help but wonder, could Lazarus have found a way to redeem himself instead? Because I happen to know that there is another Mersat who did exactly that. But maybe that's a story for another time. The story of Bangar Ruinbringer and Ryland Steelcatcher is not just one about war and power, it's a story about pride twisted into obsession, and two Char who thought they could control a dragon. How wrong they were. Bangar Ruinbringer was the Imperator of the Blood Legion, one of the strongest military leaders in Char history. However, he did have a fear that the Char were being left behind in the struggle for military power. He saw the rise of Elder Dragons be handled by the other races and thought the Char were becoming weak. He also saw the alliance with Aurene to be concerning. If the others had allied with a dragon, the Char would need to claim one of their own. Ryland Steelcatcher was born into greatness, the son of Ridlock Brimstone and Krisha Stoneglow. But Ryland never really knew his father, since he grew up in the Farar systems of the Char. Also, as far as I can tell, it doesn't seem to be customary for Char parents to be very involved with their cubs. But furthermore, Ridlock was also sent away from the Blood Legion by Bangar on a tour of the legions. This was was as a punishment for Ridlock blowing cover on a stealth mission. After this punishment, however, Ridlock still didn't return to the Blood Legion, so Ryland was forced to grow up without ever knowing his father. Ryland would be beaten with a steel rod daily while in the Farrar, until one day he caught the rod swung at him, hence the name Steel Catcher. He then nearly beat the trainer to death with the steel rod. Anyways, no matter Ryland's achievements, he always seemed to be overshadowed by the deeds of his parents. And that is where Bangar would take advantage. Bangar became like a father figure to Ryland. He nurtured Ryland's ambition, his pride, and his anger. He convinced Ryland that the Char needed strength and unity and power over others. But Ryland wasn't blind. Even though he followed Bangar, there were times where he began to doubt his mentor. Bangar would form an army of his own, built of Char that all shared his ideology. Char from all over the legions would defect to join Bangar's dominion, and together they marched north with their sights set on Jormag. Bangar believed that with the right tools he could dominate and control the dragon, but he was very misinformed. At the moment of confrontation with Jormag, Bangar would finally learn the error of his ways. Bangar expected the dragon would see his strength and leadership and offer him power, but instead, Jormag thought him to be arrogant and past his prime. Jormag humiliated him, transforming Bangar into merely the voice, a puppet to speak the will of Jormag. Jormag turned to Ryland and sensed his true desire, offering him power and everything Bangar never could. So Ryland accepted and became the champion of Jormag. Ankka began her life as an Inquest intern alongside Gorick at the infamous Thuamanova reactor. She survived the reactor disaster, but unlike Gorick, she never really recovered from what she witnessed there. To Ankka, that catastrophe proved that the world is nothing but chaos. She joined the Aetherblades under Captain Mai Trin, embracing the lawless freedom of piracy in the mists. Raiding fractals and killing endless alternate versions of herself began to erode her sense of identity. She discovered lingering death magic of Zaitan and infused her body with it, unknowingly exposing herself to the Void. The Void is a raw form of magic that makes up all things. It can be thought of as a combination of every type of magic in one. However, the Void will easily corrupt anyone who comes in direct contact with it. Some of the most wise beings on Tyria have called the Void a form of chaos incarnate. Ankka, who struggled with her sense of identity, became corrupted and began to believe that the chaos she already saw in the world was some sort of sign of inevitable destruction. She saw many heroes rise up to save the world, only for the world to be threatened once again. Ankka decided that the world didn't need saving. It needed to be reset completely for good. Now corrupted by the Void, she would attempt to expose Suwan and the rest of Tyria to the Void. Ankka is a bit of a chilling villain. When we encounter her, she is far beyond the point of reasoning. She truly believes that all-out destruction is some sort of mercy. Even in her dying breath, she still questions why anyone would waste their time saving a world that is doomed to fail. Eparch, the Midnight King, is the ruler of the Cryptus, who are a race of demons. Eparch was a lot smarter than the average chaotic demon, but he would often let his anger and hatred cloud his judgment. He made a lot of questionable decisions as king, but he did manage to unite the demons of Nyos into a structured society with noble houses and military ranks. However, it was built upon fear. Eparch would dub himself as king and force the others to serve him, and didn't just rule over his people, he would turn to feeding upon them as well. This would keep his power stronger than others and also keep the others in line with the fear of being consumed. But Eparch wasn't always like this. There was a time when he tried to resist his demonic nature. Far back in history, Eparch somehow crossed over into Tyria during the previous dragon cycle. Mordramoth would hunt Eparch relentlessly, almost killing him, him, but he would be rescued by Isgarin and the Astral Ward. Eparch would live among the Astral Ward for quite some time and be taught more about the world of Tyria, but over time, his demonic nature would get the better of him. Cryptids need to consume essence to survive. It's their nature. And one of the most common sources is life essence they can get from consuming another being. Eparch unintentionally had been starved of this for so long and began to feel an overwhelming hunger. He tried explaining this situation to Isgarin, hoping for help, but Isgarin dismissed him. He eventually snapped and murdered a village of centaurs and consumed their bodies. Isgarin was furious and banished him back to his home realm of Nyos, but this would trigger Eparch's hatred for Isgarin and all of Tyria. Eparch would build up his strength and build his kingdom of fear and cruelty. Anyone who stood against him would be destroyed and consumed. A Cryptis lord by the name of Phaebe tried to oppose Eparch, but was made example of by public execution, and from this point, no one could stand against Eparch. After a long time building up an army, he would attempt to cross over to Tyria to wage war, but his undoing would come at the hands of his own kind. A Cryptis lord by the name of Paitha started a rebellion. She knew that attacking Tyria was unsustainable. It would only lead to the death of the Cryptis. The cycle of endless consumption set in motion by Eparch needed to stop, and with the help of the commander and the Astral Ward, maybe Paitha could do that. Maybe she could use Isgarin and his power to destroy Eparch completely, bringing an end to his tyrannical rule. With the growing support of the Cryptis, Paitha would launch an attack on Eparch, who was forced to hide in his citadel. And his old ways of consuming his subjects would backfire when he would actually consume his entire army, leaving him defenseless. Thinking about it, Eparch has a difficult story. He definitely wasn't innocent after everything he did, but his time with the Astral Ward makes me wonder, could they have found a way to help him? Could they have found a way for his hunger to be sated without triggering some sort of violent outburst? Was he maybe just a starving creature that was misunderstood and rejected for what he was before anyone even tried to help him become something better? Now, when it comes to Vlox, I think it's debatable if we can even call him a villain. At the time of recording this video, we don't actually know the whole outcome of his storyline, but what we do know so far makes it seem like he's headed down the wrong path. His intentions may be good, but his methods do seem reckless or even dangerous. Vlox was originally an engineer in Radasum working on the Magus Dam, but after reporting several problems about the dam structure and being ignored every single time, the dam would eventually collapse. This collapse would teach Vlox a lesson that would shape his ideology. Tyria's leadership is incompetent. They are too worried about politics and keeping up appearances that they won't do what is needed to be done. Vlox would abandon Radasum and join up with the Inquest. He would rise through the ranks to the point of becoming an Inquest director. Vlox generally agrees with the actions of the commander to save the world, but he thinks that the current methods of doing things are ineffective. He thinks that Tyria needs to be reshaped into something new and the power given back to its people, so he launches an expedition to Castora to use ancient seer magic to help him do this. Vlox seems to have a weird sense of morality. He seems to think that as long as the desired result is achieved, how you got there is irrelevant. For example, when confronted about his involvement with the Inquest, he doesn't deny that they're evil and dangerous. He justifies them by saying he is using a force of evil to do an ultimately good thing. Vlox is an interesting character. He can be cast in the villain role, but depending on the perspective, he might be right. Controlling the divine power of the seers might give him the ability to right all wrongs and reshape Tyria. Or it could be another case of one person wielding too much power that they don't fully understand. So that's going to be all for our lore talk about the major villains of Guild Wars 2. There are many other villains present in the story. These are just the ones that I decided to focus on. The ones that I think are the major villain behind the other villains. If you enjoyed this dive into Guild Wars 2 lore, please give a like, subscribe, become a member, or watch another video. Thank you very much for watching this one, especially if you made it all the way here to the end. I hope to see you again in another video, and goodbye for now.